It does look like we have at least 7 attendees. Oh, wow. 12, 13, cool. But Francine, I don't know if, have you done the webinar format before?
No, so you can't see anyone?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
But if you go down to participants, you'll see the number of participants and you'll be able to see names. But yeah, primarily through this, we won't see anyone, but they will have a question and answer chat function.
Okay, can they see me right now?
They will be able to see, yes. They can also see me as well.
Okay, cool. Hello. Great. We're just waiting for Beverly right now. My name is Francine, for those who are just hopping on. And I am the regional coordinator in the state of Utah. And our presenter, Beverly, she's just having some technical difficulties currently. So we're just waiting for her to get those sorted and she will be on shortly. So thank you for your patience. Hey, Dustin, it looks like the chat is disabled. If you can go ahead and enable that, please.
Thank you. I'm going to do that right now. Hi, Beverly.
Oh, we're rocking.
Can you see and hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, thank goodness. Always something, I swear.
Amazing. So Beverly, we have our participants. You can just see them on the participants button, about 16 people with us. And we just asked folks where they're joining from and what their favorite thing to do in the summer is. So they're dropping those in the chat right now. And MJ is from Australia. Good morning.
People from all over.
Awesome. Well, you can probably kick us off whenever you're ready. For those who missed it, my name is Francine, and I am the regional coordinator for the state of Utah. I apologize. I'm getting over COVID right now. My brain is not fully firing. So if I seem laggy, that is why. But my name is Francine. I'm regional coordinator in Utah. My counterpart is Freddie, who couldn't be here tonight, but we love her. Thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to say thank you, Beverly, for your time today to share your wisdom and knowledge with all these folks all over the place. So I'm going to kick it off to you. And I'm excited to see what you have to share with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Francine. I appreciate everyone's patience as, of course, I encountered some technology issues. So again, I appreciate everyone sticking by. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And if at any point there's anything I can do to adjust my voice or the screen so you can see better, please unmute and speak up so we can have the best experience possible here this evening or this morning for some of you. Let's see.
And actually, Beverly, I don't know if people can speak, but they can put things in the question and answer. So I'll just be monitoring that as those come in or in the chat.
Fabulous. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Awesome. So as Francine mentioned, my name is Beverly, and I will be guiding us through a clinic on the menstrual cycle and how it impacts training considerations and injury risk. We are going to start with an overview just to give you guys an idea about what to expect today. We'll start with an introduction. I'll give you guys some information on myself and where I come from and my education. Then we'll take a second to reflect on our experiences and potentially share if we feel comfortable. We will revisit the menstrual cycle in general, as I'm sure many of you haven't been exposed to that for several years or maybe even like high school. Then we will speak to the impact of those phases on, again, training and injury risk. We'll move into a short workout to apply what we learned and hopefully be able to take that with us. And then we will look at some questions to check our knowledge and to gauge where we're at with this information, as I believe it's extremely important and we should be talking about this more. So by the end of today, athletes will be able to understand the two-phase model of the menstrual cycle. They'll be able to recall the main hormones that contribute to performance and the associated injuries. And we'll be able to understand how we can adjust training based on the recommendations. So a little about me before we get started. My name is Beverly Albert. I got my bachelor's at Minnesota State, exercise science, went on to enter the strength and conditioning field, working as a strength and conditioning coach for different populations. Went to the University of Utah for my master's, where I studied high altitude and the impact on athletes. And now I'm getting my PhD, continuing that research. I own my own company called the Albert Approach, where we teach practical knowledge for athletes so that they can become independent in programming for their sports and to prevent injuries. So I'm going to give you guys a second, and if you have a pencil and paper, I encourage you to take a minute or two to reflect on your experience with menstruation and periods in sports. And if you haven't been in any structured sports, maybe just think to your experience just every day when it comes to maybe attitudes around the menstrual cycle or aligned experiences. So I'll give you guys about a minute to think about, again, what your experience is, and I encourage you to write it down. And as we wrap up our thoughts, I would like to share my experience with the menstrual cycle in sports. I remember growing up in track and field, there was almost this attitude towards losing your period as if it was like a prowess of athletic achievement, that you worked this hard to get to the point where it's missing. I'm not sure if anybody else has experiences. Feel free to share in the chat if you feel comfortable. And in my time within the strength and conditioning field, I've also noticed that as a male-dominated discipline, we have traditionally steered away from these conversations in general. See, Courtney's had some experiences on race day. As more and more females have entered the strength and conditioning field into higher education and research, we've noticed that there's been big gaps in what we've studied in terms of sports and how we've looked specifically at females. A lot of the research we have done has been on males, as the female cycle has been viewed as an anomaly, very challenging to control in a research setting. So we are just starting to understand how the menstrual cycle and the various phases impact our sports. Thank you for sharing, Courtney. So we'll move into the menstrual cycle overall. And on average, the menstrual cycle lasts 28 to 35 days. So this is, as we're speaking to an individual who isn't on birth control, that might affect the length of their cycle or whether or not they get their period. So again, keep that in mind. And there are two phases that we will be speaking to. Many of you guys may have been exposed to the 4-phase model and in thinking to that in terms of performance. But for simplicity and based on what we know, we don't really need to think that in depth in order to understand how each half impacts things we should think about during sports. So during our cycle, our brain and our reproductive system are constantly talking. They are sending signals back and forth in the form of hormones, and it's just a feedback system. So the first day of your cycle is the start of your period. This is when our hormones are the lowest. Our hormones rapidly drop, and that triggers the lining in our uterus to be released, and that is your period. So that lasts a few days, a week, maybe a little longer for some. And over that time, our, again, reproductive systems communicating with the brain, starting the cycle over again. So during that time, our estrogens beginning to increase as we are preparing the body for potential pregnancy. Once we get to that halfway mark, that is the start of the second phase, the luteal phase. First phase, follicular phase. Second phase, luteal phase. And that is when our hormones are the highest. So that is when, hormonally speaking, we are the most different than men. Our progesterone's at its peak, again, preparing for pregnancy, redirecting a bunch of resources to our reproductive system for potential fertilization and getting pregnant. So say we do not get pregnant, then our reproductive system continues to talk with our brain, and we end up shedding our lining, starting the cycle over again. So we have fluctuations up until that day 28, and those fluctuations impact our risk for injury and how we should think about training. There are other hormones that come into play during our cycle, but for simplicity, we don't need to really think about those other ones, as progesterone and estrogen are the primary hormones that impact our risk for injury, which is really important as athletes and wanting to be an athlete, especially a high caliber athlete, for as long as possible. So recap, first day of our period is the first day of our cycle. Halfway through our cycle, when we start ovulation, when our body's primed to get pregnant, that's the start of the second half of our cycle. As our hormones begin to increase, we have PMS, which is labeled here. That's the peak of all of our hormones, and that's when you're like feeling moody and whatnot. And if we don't get pregnant, that signals to the brain to rapidly shed our lining, starting the cycle over again. Okay, so we're going to speak to that first phase, that phase where our hormones are the lowest and we're most similar to men. So again, this is the follicular phase, starting with the onset of our period up to ovulation. This can be viewed as the window of opportunity for athletes. So because our hormones are the lowest, contrary to popular belief, this is actually when we're the most like men. That being said, we are more fatigue resistant, we recover faster, not only after short bursts of high intensity, but also after longer training sessions. We're able to adapt long-term to strength and power development. So this is the time to train heavy and run hard, as we are the most protected here. We also have the lowest risk for injury during our follicular phase. And as a side note, there are going to be times between the phases where it's like a transition and things are a little different, like when you're spotting and leading onto your period, when you're having PMS. So it's important to think about your experiences and see how they line up with what we've seen overall. So moving from the follicular phase, again, that first half. Now we'll move into the luteal phase, the second half of our cycle. This is our high hormone portion. And this is when we're most not like men. So the two key hormones that impact our ability to adapt to exercise and training and impact our injury risk is estrogen and progesterone. Those hormones tell our body to redirect resources and prioritize the potential for fertilization, getting pregnant. That being said, these hormones increase our joint laxity, making them less supportive. And it makes sense too when you think about childbirth. There is a joint in your pelvis and hips that opens to allow a baby to pass through. And progesterone, well, mostly progesterone, impacts the ability for that to happen. So it can translate over to other joints within the body too. Towards that last quarter of our cycle, when our hormones are the highest and we're starting to transfer over to the start of the next cycle, we experience PMS. High hormones cause us to have stomach distress, our moods change, and our core temperature is actually higher. So we perceive exercise as more challenging, and our attitude towards maybe strenuous activity is not as great as maybe it could be. During this time of our cycle, this is when we can focus in on lower intensity movements, as well as a systematic deload. It's important to note that I'm not recommending that anyone just stop activity and exercise, excuse my dogs, during this half of the cycle. It's more or less being more aware of what's happening to your body and using information that we're going through to be more empowered in how you can adapt your training to become the best athlete you can be. Again, the estrogen and progesterone, they increase our injury risk here. So proceed with caution as our hormones are high. So a recap of the two phases side by side here helps too. So we have the follicular phase. Again, the start when our hormones are the lowest. 2-week window of opportunity. This is when you train heavy and hard in order to promote those long-term adaptions. Our injury risk is the lowest here. As we move to that second half of our cycle, the luteal phase, starting at the onset of ovulation and ends at our period when we start over again. This is the proceed with caution and being aware and understanding of what's going on in our body so that we can reduce our injury risk by decreasing exercise intensity and potentially pulling back a bit. Also a great time to engage in active recovery. So aside from the hormonal differences between males and females, I'm sure you've noticed that there is structural differences. We tend to have narrower shoulders, wider hips, and our center of gravity is lower, shorter limbs and tendons. And all of these things, especially when you add in estrogen and progesterone, create this setting for potential disaster if you're not careful. So speaking to progesterone's impact on joint laxity, females have increased risk for ACL tears, for bone stress injuries, should be BSM, and other lower body injuries. So that being said, it's really important to prioritize hip and core strength and stability in our training and practice landing mechanics so that we're setting ourselves up well in our sport situations so that we are reducing that injury risk. So based on what we covered today, again, I'm trying to keep it simple so that you guys can retain as much information possible. Do we have any questions that to the menstrual cycle or how those phases impact performance? Awesome. Let's see.
It looks like there's one question, Beverly.
So can you guys see the chat box up on my screen?
No.
Cool. I was just checking in. So we have two questions up. The first one is, what if you are on hormonal birth control? So in order to keep this simple, I'm going to go back to this chart. So the two main hormones that are created in labs and are in birth controls are a variation of progesterone and a variation of estrogen. I know I've heard from just random people about how birth control kind of pretends your body that you're pregnant. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true or not, but I know that with birth controls that are higher in progesterone and estrogen, because there's different tiers of intensity of birth control, so to say, the higher tier that you're on, the less spread out your graph is. So the less dramatic these changes are. So imagine if these changes aren't as diverse, that can impact our risk as we don't have those bigger dips in our hormones as, say, someone who is on an IUD. So again, just spreads out that graph when we have less dips than if we were on a non-hormonal birth control. There is a lot that we can speak to in terms of birth control and recommendations for sports, and questions that might be worth asking your doctor. And I know that because there's so much, keep your eye out for future panelist Zoom talks through SheJumps, as we hope to be giving you guys more information. So the second question was, what happens when you have to follow a training plan and it doesn't live up to your phases, or they don't line up to your phases? So that's a great question. So if you're training with a coach, I think it's essential to have these conversations, especially if you're noticing hot spots come up at certain times in your cycle. So a reason why I'm so passionate about spreading this information is I'm my coach. So I think it's really important to not only speak to your exercise and medical professionals about this, but also to be kind to yourself. Again, as I spoke to earlier, I'm not recommending that you don't train during these weeks, but I'm recommending that you listen to your body and know that you might experience flare-ups in maybe past injuries. You might feel extra tired during these runs. They might be some of your worst perceived training sessions. So if you have a hard time adjusting your training for systematic deload and decreasing intensity, I recommend practicing that self-awareness so that you can pull back. Maybe you run slower, you don't run as long, especially if you're feeling those things. And knowing this information is empowering, so that when you do experience exercise sessions where you don't feel as great, you can think back and be like, okay, it kind of makes sense why maybe yesterday I didn't run as fast as I usually do, because I'm leading up to my period. And maybe you can practice some better self-talk in those situations.
Beverly, we also have a question from the Q&A chat box from Caitlin. Can you give examples of active recovery, examples of good exercise to practice in luteal phase?
Yes. So there's a few different types of recovery. First, there's relative recovery. So relative recovery is when, say, you're a cyclist or a runner and you use your legs most of the time during your training. Relative recovery would be maybe we do a little upper body resistance training or some rowing or swimming, something that is more intensive in a different part of the body. Some other examples of active recovery are brisk walking, slow flow yoga. And I spoke to deloading earlier before too, and say if you've been trying to work your way up to bench 100 pounds and you notice yourself feeling off as you're approaching the end of your luteal phase, that would be a great time to maybe pull back to 90 pounds and perform your reps. So all in all, thinking about the intensity that you usually sustain and feel good at earlier in the cycle and pulling it back. And that's going to look a little different for everybody. That was a great question. Thank you.
And then you have another one in the chat.
Awesome. Well, the question is, do you have any recommendations for getting through high intensity activities during those high hormone phases? I've been doing a lot of mountaineering and it just doesn't always work to line up trips with my cycle. Absolutely. Especially as when you travel, that stress and those new settings can impact how our bodies like talking and can change your cycle. That's a great question. So I think practicing positive self-talk and maybe speaking to your climbing partners or your teammates about some of these concerns about an upcoming expedition or an upcoming trip, and maybe creating a plan for how you can integrate some of those kind self-perspectives into your trip, I think is a great idea. Because that is true as athletes too, and especially in a world where adapting training to your menstrual cycle isn't something that is super common at this point. Hopefully we'll get there. Having those open conversations and increasing the awareness has allowed me to be inherently more kind to myself. And I challenge you to think about that relationship you have with yourself, to adjust that self-talk, as well as preparing in your follicular phase so that intensity in those settings doesn't feel as strenuous, if that makes sense. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Those are all great questions. So at the end of this presentation, I will be putting a link into the chat that will have a quick survey in that. And if you fill out the survey, it's just 2 questions, one being your email, I can share this information with you too. And one book that I really recommend for anyone who is seeking additional information on this, Dr. Stacy Sims is the leading researcher in studying female-specific physiology and how it impacts sports. And she has a very awesome, easily digestible book called Roar that I recommend looking into, as she speaks to not only the training, which is kind of my branch of the discipline, but she also speaks to hydration and how the menstrual cycle phases impact how you should be fueling for sports. So I definitely recommend looking into this book. And I see some comments about having good experiences with this book. So I will be sending out that information as well as the information of these slides if you fill out that survey. Let's see. So we are going to briefly check in with your guys' knowledge of, based on what we spoke to. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second, pull up these interactive questions so that we can kind of gauge where we're at with this information. Okay. All right, so you can answer these questions on your piece of paper or just in your head. or feel free to answer the question in the chat so we can see where your guys' knowledge is after this conversation. So we spoke to 2 hormones that have a big influence on our ability to adapt to training and our injury risk. So I just want you guys to take a second and think about what those hormones are. The 2 hormones that we spoke to, there are, again, a lot of hormones that come into play within the menstrual cycle. The 2 hormones are estrogen and progesterone, and they impact our joint elasticity, how our body metabolizes nutrients. It actually impacts a lot. And those are the 2 things I challenge you to remember or refer back to as when you have conversations with your doctor, your gynecologist, speaking openly about your goals as well as your needs medically are very important and empowering. So if there's one thing to take away from that injury risk portion, it's those 2. So next, we have the 2 phases, and I referred to them as these 2. I refer to them generally as these 2 things: blank levels of hormones and blank levels of hormones. So just take a second and think to what I called those phases earlier on in the PowerPoint. So I did have multiple choice questions, but naturally, we are still encountering some of those technical difficulties. So thank you for your patience. So the follicular phase, again, that first half is considered the 2-week window of opportunity phase. So that would have been challenging to potentially recall. So I acknowledge that. And again, this is also called the low hormone phase. And the opposite would be the luteal phase, which I refer to as the proceed with caution phase, or the low hormone phase. Again, follicular, low risk for injury. We adapt a lot better to exercise. Luteal, high hormones, proceed with caution. We adapt slower to exercise, and we have a higher injury. And here are those points as well. And all in all, I recommend that you think about what you experience in these 2 phases, write down your symptoms, as it can be very helpful and empowering to know when and what to do during your training in order to get the most bang for your buck and use our unique bodies as a way to adapt to become better athletes and not necessarily use them as a barrier or maybe even an excuse. So before we move into our workout, do we have any questions? Awesome. So at the end of this presentation, I'll be sharing my email. So if anything comes up for you, feel free to email me your questions. I'd be more than happy to continue this conversation further. Let's see. All right. And you guys can just see me now, correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. Awesome. So for those of you who aren't able to stay for the workout, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was really awesome to get to share this knowledge with you guys. And let me share this link for those who might have to dip quick. For the sake of time, here is my email, and that's funny, my husband's picture is on my little square. So feel free to reach out and I can share that survey with you, Deborah, or anyone else who needs to hop off. So I will move us into our workout. So for the workout, all you need is some space on the ground or in your room. If you want to just be on the ground, that's great. Otherwise, you can use a mat. And these movements will be body weight, and we'll be able to modify them based on different abilities, or maybe if you know where you are in your cycle, you can adapt that as well. So we are going to be doing a on-off system where we'll be performing work for 30 to 40 seconds. I encourage you to shoot for that 30-second range if you know that you're further along in your cycle. And for those who maybe are on their period or within that follicular, that first phase, feel free to hold the position or perform the movement for that 40 seconds. So I will be timing these movements and I will be speaking up when that 30 seconds is up and that 40 seconds is up. And for those who stop at 30, you'll take 30 seconds off until the top of that next minute before repeating that movement again. Whereas the people who are going to perform the movement or hold for 40 seconds, you will be taking 20 seconds of recovery and we'll be starting that next round together. We'll be performing 4 rounds of each movement, again, 30 or 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, choosing a variation that suits your needs and abilities. And as I spoke to you before, because we have a higher risk for ACL injuries, bone stress injuries, as well as other lower body injuries, during our workout today, we are going to be focusing on core and hip stability and strength. So being able to maintain a tall torso in positions where maybe we're moving or placing ourselves in a spot where we want to lean or twist a different direction. So we have, again, we'll revisit the structure after we go through a brief warm up. So I'm just gonna push my camera back. And again, we're gonna start with a warm up. Make sure you guys can see me. All right, so we're gonna put a few minutes on the clock. And the goal here is just to get the body warm as we enter into the main portion of our warm up. So we're gonna start with some jump rope. So we're faking the jump rope. We're staying light on the toes, being explosive, pressing off the ground. So again, we're just building that internal heat, increasing our core temperature. And a variation here could be just steps off the sides. Or maybe jump rope. You're gonna keep going, a few more seconds. Let's slowly come to a stop. We're gonna bring our feet shoulder hip width apart, and we are going to do some body weight squats. So we are going to brace the core. We're going to sit down the back like we're sitting in a chair. Inhaling down, exhaling to the top. Making sure our knees aren't caving and that we are engaging through the lower body. Keep going, making sure you guys can see me better. Awesome. About 5 more in there. Inhaling down, exhaling to the top. Evenly pressing through the feet. Good control down and back up. Let's slowly come to a stop. And from here, let's bring your arms into a T, feet hip width apart. We're trying to create some small arm circles forward. We're using that warmth we established, focusing in on some of the smaller muscles in our shoulders, as we'll be on our hands during our workout. So start to create our circles in the opposite direction. Good control. I'm sure you're starting to build some heat as well. This room gets really warm, so that's perfect, like a sauna in here. Great work. From here, let's bring our arms to our sides, and we're going to be doing some alternating knee hugs. We have one foot planted. Let's engage the core to lift the knee, and then finishing with the hug. Pausing at the top. Good control down, alternating sides. Again, we are using our core to flex at the hip, hugging our knee into us at the top. Establishing length in the back of our legs, challenging our balance, and tuning in to maybe one side easier than the other. Are we noticing anything in our base to support leg below? Let's slowly come to a stop. So we should be nice and warm. So to revisit the structure of our workout, we have 4 different movements, and we're going to be focusing in on each movement by itself. I will have a timer going. We'll be going for a total of 4 minutes for each movement, including the rest. So for those of you who know where you are in your cycle and know that you're in that first half, the follicular phase, I challenge you to perform the movement for the 40 seconds before taking that 20-second recovery. And for those who are in that second half of your phase, the second half of your cycle in the luteal phase, I challenge you to consider picking the 30 seconds of movement and taking the 30 seconds of rest. Good example of what you can do on your own, pulling back duration, is a way to modify your training so that you're doing a little bit less than what you usually do. So the first movement we are going to be performing is going to be a hip extension hold. So if you have access to an ottoman, chair, or if not, we can always use the ground. I'll demonstrate first, show you the variations, and then we will go through the work for our 30 to 40 seconds, our rest for 20 to 30 seconds, and then we'll repeat for 4 times before moving on to the next movements. So for our hip extension hold, option to alternate single legs, we are going to lower ourselves onto our ottoman, our couch, or a tall seated position. So we're going to lower our back onto the long edge of the seat, stacking our knees over our heels, and we're driving through our heels. So we're connected through the hips and the ribs, staying long. We're going to be holding here. Option 1. Option 2, we can alternate extending our legs in front to challenge that stability that we spoke to. Or we can also do a variation of a bridge pose with our feet planted, engaging our hips to hold ourselves off of the ground, ribs connected, upper body long. So take a second to think about the variation you'll be performing and acknowledge whether or not you'll be doing the 30 seconds of movement, 30 seconds off, or the 40 seconds of movement and 20 seconds off. Do we have any questions before we get started? Awesome. So I'm setting my timer. Let's get ourselves into our position to begin. And I'll be demonstrating the different variations as we go through. And feel free to change it up as we go as well, based on what you're looking for. So let's set ourselves up. We have, okay, we're starting. We have 30 to 40 seconds. We're engaging, we're holding. We're really working on the hips here. Our hips are keeping a long position between our upper body. And our hips help stabilize the knee and the rest of our core while we perform exercises. Our sport's very important here. All right, that's 30 seconds for those who are taking that 30-second work rest. A few more seconds for those who are doing the 40. Great work, keep it up. And recover. So we have 20 seconds left before we start round 2. Let's set ourselves up for that second set. This time I will be doing the alternating single leg in my extension. And we'll start our work now. Choosing again the variation that's best for us. Really fighting the urge to rotate in this position. We're bracing the core. This one's going to punch us in the belly. We're staying long, pressing through the heels in whichever variation we choose. Practicing those kind thoughts that we spoke to earlier. A few more seconds, great work. That's 30 seconds for those who are taking the 30-second work rest. Great work, keep engaging and recover. 20 seconds before we start round 3. Great work, you guys. Feel free to grab water throughout. Let's set ourselves up for set 3. This time, I will be in the hip extension variation on the ground. And go. We have we're still engaging, holding, breathing, no breath holding. Great work. Few more seconds for those. Great, that's 30 seconds. Keep holding, engaging for those who are going to 40. And recover. Great work, you guys. We have one more set before we move on to our next movement. All right, let's set ourselves up for our final set. 3, 2, 1, go. Great work, you guys. Engaging as hard as you make it for yourself. Acknowledging where you're at in your workout, your journey. Noticing how far you've come. Great work. A few more seconds. And that's 30 seconds. We have 10 more for the 40. And recover. Great work. So we'll be doing that same format for the next 3 movement patterns. Great work, you guys. So our next movement pattern is going to be a plank hold with alternating.
Beverly, I don't know if you lost sound, but I don't know. I didn't catch any of that.
Let's see. All right, I will repeat that. What was the last thing that you heard?
None of it.
None at all?
Well, no, I heard the part where you said we were going into the next 3 movements, but when you started explaining the movement.
Okay, great. So I will revisit that. So we have 3 more movements that we're going to be performing in that same cycle. Again, the 30 to 40 seconds on. Think some background noise. 30 to 40 seconds on, 20 to 30 off, repeating 3 times. Instead of demonstrating, I would just speak to the camera after showing you the movement initially. So we're going to be in an extended arm plank for this next movement. We're finding a long spine, shoulders over hands, and option to be on our knees. That means down between the thumbs. So for the 30 to 40 seconds, we are going to alternate shoulder taps, fighting the urge to rotate the torso. Again, you can either do that on your toes or on your knees. Did you guys hear that okay?
Yeah, that seemed to come through. Good.
Great. Thank you for letting me know. So again, we'll be doing 3 sets of that 30 to 40 on, 20 to 30 off. Let's set ourselves up to prepare for that first set of our extended arm planks with shoulder taps. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. So we're long on our hands. Our feet can be a little wider than shoulder width so that we're not rotating as much. The goal is to fight the rotation throughout. And again, if you need to be on your knees, that works as well. Continuing to gauge, we're bracing the core as if someone's going to punch you in the belly, that anticipation. A few more seconds for those who are doing the 30 seconds. And that's 30. A few more seconds for those who are doing the 40. Great work, you guys. Fight the rotation and recover. 20 seconds before the start of that next set. Making sure that we're breathing throughout as well. Let's begin to set ourselves up for that second set of our plank shoulder taps. And we'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Fighting the urge to rotate, staying square to the ground, pressing through our fingers and keeping our hips in line with our spine so we're not pushing our butt up nice and high. A few more seconds until we're at 30. Great work. Keep bracing, engaging. We're breathing. That's 30 seconds. Great work. Keep it up, you guys. Few more. Get a few more taps in there. And recover. That's 40. Remember to take this time, breathe, grab some water. 10 seconds until we start round 3. Great work, you guys. We'll set up and start in 3, 2, 1, go. Good control on those taps, shifting our weight. Fight the urge to rotate. Having more control over our torso when we are moving our hand away or whatnot is great practice. Again, protect the lower body. Few more seconds. Great work. Keeping that long spine. That's 30 seconds. Great work. And that's 40. Awesome job. We have one more set. Great work, you guys. 10 seconds. Let's set up for that next set. I know it's getting hard. You're doing great. We'll start in 3, 2, 1. Final set. Stay long. It's really easy to let our form start to diminish as we're tired. Keep that long spine. If we need to go to our knees, no problem. Keeping control or staying square as we tap. Great work, you guys. Keep moving. You're doing great. That's 30 seconds. A few more seconds for those who are going to 40. You got it. Keep it up. Keep it up. And recover. Awesome work. So we did our hip extension to start. We did our core with our taps to challenge our stability. And now we are going to be doing a lunge variation, not only challenge our core stability, but to also isolate each leg by itself. So I will demonstrate that here. I'll talk nice and loud. So I know you can only see my lower body, which is the most important part. So we're going to be walking on a plank and not a tightrope, stepping into a lunge so that we're finding a 90-degree angle at both knees. And again, we're wider than narrow. We have a long spine. We're going to hold option 1. So I can let you know when we're halfway so we can switch. Don't fear the knee over the toe in front, as long as we're not collapsing in. That's option 1. Option 2 would be our traditional alternating lunges, lowering down, not touching the back knee to the ground, pressing off the front leg to the back. Another option would be to alternate SheJumps. We're lowering down, switching our legs like scissors, back to the start. So we'll pick our variation. And I will let you guys know when we hit that halfway mark for each. So if you choose the hold, you can make sure you get each side appropriately. We'll start that first set in 3, 2, 1, go. We're in our lunge. We're staying long in the upper body. Bending both legs. If we're holding or engaging, staying in that one spot. Keep going. That's 15 seconds for those in the hold. Great work. That's 20 seconds for those in the hold. Keep it up, keep it up. So close. That's 30 seconds. Awesome work. Few more breaths. And that's 40. So that's round 1. We'll take that time off. Repeat 3 more times. Continuing to tune in. Notice how you're feeling during these different movements, especially as we get single sides involved. Is one side easier than the other? I'll set up for that next set. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Great work, you guys. Keep engaging, keep breathing or pressing off that front leg. And we're exhaling on those jumps if we choose to jump. Inhaling through the lowers, exhaling as we press. That's 15 seconds. Great work. Awesome work, you guys. 20. That's 30. Great work. A few more seconds. Keep breathing. and recover 40. Nice work. That's 2. We have 2 more. Awesome work, you guys. Grab water, keep breathing. We'll set up for that 3rd set. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Maybe you switch variations. Really listen to your body. That's what it's all about. Becoming more self-aware. Practicing those good self-talk. That's 15. Nice work. That's 20. Keep it up. Keep breathing. Awesome job. Getting stronger each second here. That's 30 seconds. Fabulous work. And 40. 20 seconds off. We'll start that final set. Great work, you guys. Staying close to the camera so you guys can hear me better. Last time here. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Awesome work, you guys. Keep it up. Really tune into your form, making sure our knees aren't collapsing in. We're not collapsing the upper body as we lunge. That's 15 seconds. Nice job. That's 20. Keep it up. Keep it up. Awesome work. We're almost there. That's 30 seconds. And 40. Great work. So we have one more movement that we will be going through. Again, that same 30 to 40 seconds on, 20 to 30 seconds off, repeating 4 times. So this is another core position that's going to encourage us to keep a strong torso in our sports while we're lifting and during activities of everyday living. So this is called a hollow body hold. So we're going to find ourselves on the ground, and we are going to recline back on the ground. So we're either on our mats on the space on the floor, and we are going to press the small of our back into the ground, minimizing that space. And option 1, we're going to lift our legs, pressing our back down into the ground with our arms extended. That's option 1. We're pulling that belly button in. Option 2, we're going to extend our legs, arms towards the feet. Option 3, we reach above. The longer we make ourselves, the longer the lever, the harder it is, with the goal to press the space in our lower back, make it non-existent. So let's take a second to think about the variation we'll be choosing. Again, the shorter we make ourselves, the less intensive it'll be, whereas the longer we make ourselves, the more intensive it will be. We'll start our first of 4 rounds in 3, 2, 1, go. Pressing the small of your back down. We're staying long. If we are bent or extended, we're reaching, engaging, breathing, creating no space between our lower back, our lumbar spine, and the ground. Awesome work, you guys. Keep going. Few more seconds for you 30-seconders. That's 30. Great work. Keep going, keep breathing, keep bracing the belly. And recover. Great work. That's round 1. Great work, you guys. 10 seconds before that second round. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, round 2. Keep breathing, keep engaging. You're doing great. We're getting stronger with each breath, each second, each breath. preventing injuries. Great work, you guys. Keep it up. Few more seconds. You can, you can. And 30, great work. Few more seconds for those who are doing 40. Nice job, you got it. And recover. That was round 2 of 4. Great work, you guys. Let's set up for our set of 3. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. Great work. Keep breathing, keep engaging, keeping that tight belly button in towards us. And if we need, let's shorten our lever before we lower to the ground. Practicing those kind thoughts, maybe we count our breath. Great work. That's 30. And 40, nice job. We have one more round. We'll start our final round in 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Last time, nice work. Awesome job, keep bracing, keep going. You're getting better each breath, keep it up. And that's 30, awesome work. Few more seconds for those going to 40. Awesome work. And recover. So take a second here. Let's reconnect with our breath. Maybe you stand up, take some steps side to side. Grab some water. How are we feeling, you guys? Awesome. So again, we took a very simple format of holding a movement or performing reps during a duration of time. We had 2 options, and you always have a lot of options, which is awesome. So we did 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And that was my recommendation for those who are in that later time of their cycle. And we also had the option to do more time moving or holding, 40 seconds with 20 seconds off for those who maybe are on their period or in that first phase, that follicular phase. We also had options to do movements at lower intensity, like the hollow body hold. We got shorter, lowering the lever, or we had the option to lower to our knees and the shoulder taps, or even isolate the sides of our body in our hip extensions, right? There's always ways to make movements and holds less challenging. And those are some great examples of movements that you can put into your training, and even modifications you can use in your training when you are tuned into your menstrual cycle and know where, when you're tuned into your menstrual cycle and know how you should be adapting your movements and training. So I know we covered a lot today. Do we have any additional questions? And I just sent the link to that form. So if you alter your stretching routine during that time as well. So that is a great question. So there is some research that suggests that having unsymmetrical mobility can impact your risk for injury too. So when it comes to adapting your training based on your phases, I still recommend that you tune in and listen to your body. Don't let yourself overstretch, especially if you're telling yourself to do yoga during the second half of your cycle. I always recommend to practice mobility over flexibility in general, and focusing in on your hip mobility, not only during a certain phase, but all the time, can prevent lower body injuries too. So the difference would be active mobility or active stretching is the ability to use control and muscle strength to lift your leg up. Do you see how I'm engaging here? I'm using my muscles, and I have control of the range of motion I have. This position where I'm active is a lot different than if I were to hold onto my foot and stretch it really tall. That's passive. So it's important to think about how much mobility you have versus flexibility, and try to bridge the gap between the two all the time during your cycle so that you can reduce your risk for injury. So I hope that answers your question, as I don't recommend you do it differently for either. But during that luteal phase, you may be more at risk to overdoing it. So listen to your body and practice the active mobility instead of passive stretching. That was a great question. Do we have any other questions? So since we have a few minutes, I'm going to reshare my screen so we can revisit the two phases, as that's the most important thing that I want you guys to take away. So we'll revisit the review portion of the PowerPoint, and I can speak to what we did during that workout so that you can continue to connect the two. If you think of any questions during this review, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I just sent you the Google Forms link, and that's how you can send me your email outside of this chat to get these resources. Otherwise, I can directly email you from the information in the chat. So I will reshare my screen. And I really appreciate you guys asking questions and being engaged, as I know the setting can be challenging to do so. So thank you so much for those who are speaking up, and for those who are listening too. Okay. All right. So this is that review page. So we have the follicular phase, that first phase, the start of our period leading up to ovulation. Then we have that second phase, the luteal phase, where that starts the onset of ovulation to our next period. There's transition phases, and you may have heard conflicting information in the past about when to do what. And it's just it's more simple to think about the phases in the two-phase model, and to think about what you should be doing in your training. Estrogen and progesterone are those two hormones that are very much impacts how we adapt to training and our injury risk. And those are going to be the highest towards that second half of our cycle. This is a graph that I made, so it's not to scale. But the trends are very similar to other graphs that you'll find out there associated with pieces of research. So thinking about, again, that first half is our 2-week window of opportunity. This is when our hormones are the lowest, and we're most like men. So a lot of the traditional standards out there for weight training for conditioning, those were typically done on more men than women. So a lot of those standards align with this phase. Whereas now, as we are developing more understanding of the differences between males and females hormonally and in this setting, that second half of our cycle is when we need to be more in tune and aware of what's going on in our body. We are going to pull back a little bit, not necessarily stop our movement. Maybe we deload or make movements a little less intensive, right? By maybe making our levers smaller, maybe going to our knees. Perhaps we hold our movements for less time. Or instead of jumping, we just perform the standard movement pattern. And again, it's really important to think about how these phases impact us, but also understand how shifting our mentality around maybe what has been expected as female athletes in the past, and practicing that positive self-talk, and knowing that maybe if you're noticing your training is coming down, or you're feeling more tired, or it's harder to recover between sets, that it may be because of where you are in your cycle. And in a few training sessions, you'll likely feel better. So I know we covered a lot of information, and I really appreciate everybody coming and listening to this really cool topic. Again, we're learning so much more about the differences between males and females in training. So I encourage you to stay tuned and sign up for future courses that we'll be hosting with SheJumps to speak about not only the menstrual cycle on training and injury, but also how the shifts in hormones and pregnancy might impact our training, or how perimenopause and menopause might impact our training. As females, our hormones are changing throughout our life, and knowledge is power. And I look forward to sharing all this awesome information with you guys. Again, I'm Beverly Albert. The link for our survey is in the chat. And you can also directly reach me at beverly@thealbertapproach.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. And I appreciate the patience with the technology, as it feels almost inevitable at times in the setting. So thank you so much for sticking with me and being patient. And I look forward to working with you guys in the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Beverly, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you all have a great rest of your week.